Welcome everybody. This is our very first webinar on IoT Security Foundation and from IoT Security Foundation founding members. But most prominently, this is our first webinar or first event that we are posting as IoT Security Foundation Houston chapter. So personally, Samir Koranne here. I would like to welcome all of you. Thank you for spending next few minutes with us for the introduction webinar that we have put together. This is the start of something that we are extremely very passionate about. So without wasting additional time to just do the pleasantries, I would like to directly get into the conversation and also some of the topics that we have lined up for you today. And if I can get my presentation up. Okay, there you go. The agenda for the day is very simple. We are going to speak very briefly about IoT Security Foundation Houston itself, who we are, what we do, why we have formed this group, just to lay the foundation. We have best of the best from IoT Security Foundation, John Moor, who is going to give us a full width and breadth introduction about IoT Security Foundation, what they do, what they have been able to achieve, what are the success stories, and what inspiring story they have to share with us that hopefully will inspire all of us to do more in the IoT security world itself. And then I will give it to Durgesh, who is one of the founding members here for IoTSF Houston. He is going to walk us through what's next on IoTSF Houston chapter. All right, sounds good. Here we are, the founding members of Houston chapter. I saw Dave also was able to log on. So Chris, you had a question if we have made up Dave. It's not true. Dave, Pankaj, Roya, Durgesh, myself, Samir, all of us are here on the call today. All of us are interconnected through our past work that we have been doing in OT and IoT space already. When I had this idea of finding out something what is there in Houston area for IoT. There is a big change that is going on in terms of Industry 4.0. All the companies have started adopting, or have certain companies have started doing that few years ago already. The Industry 4.0 or digital modernization or transformation, you name it, you call it whatever you want, but this is basically the new way of business, new way of improving the customer experience through improvisation of the value chain overall. That's how I see the business side of it. I wanted to find out basically on the technology landscape, what is there in Houston, which unfortunately I was not able to find. I won't call it unfortunately, because I have a pleasure of getting integrated with IoT Security Foundation and the fabulous 4 that I have on this founding member board here for IoTSF Houston chapter to inaugurate this community of practitioners, learners, researchers, you name it. We are able to put this together for the community here. So we want to make this Houston chapter and a community available, accessible to all of the technicians, as we can get better at this. And security is always a team sport. We have to do it together, and it can be only played when we are together. So that's the idea for us to bring Houston chapter in front of you, for you, so that we can really better ourselves in IoT security foundation, IoT security, and overall IoT journey that companies have started adopting. Not just companies, but it touches our personal lives. So we will be able to do something better in our personal lives as well. With that, any of the founding members, do you have any other thought to share with the team members here or the attendees we have? If not, sounds good. Then let me introduce you to John. And John, thank you so very much for being so flexible with us on the idea that we wanted to have this. And I was pretty adamant about having this introductory session because it was 2018 when I really was researching something about IoT security and what kind of controls, what kind of framework I can find. And that's when first I found IoT Security Foundation. Fast forward 2023, I did not do much with IoT security itself from the field, from the experience perspective. And when we started discussing about the chapter formation, when I started looking more about IoT Security Foundation, as all of you might be in the same space or same level as I was about 3 or 4 months ago, you would wonder, what is IoT Security Foundation? Why do I care? What is it that will be relevant for me to learn about IoT Security Foundation? What can I do with what IoT Security Foundation has done? How can I get involved? And that's when I thought it's just foundational for us to start with a very fundamental topic. Let us discuss and make everybody and inspire everyone about IoT Security Foundation itself. So John has been very kind to share next 45 minutes with us to be able to share his experience, his journey, IoT Security Foundation, and the successes that we have seen in last several years. So just a quick introduction, as you can read a lot of information that we have it in front of we have it on the slide. But apart from that, basically, he is the embedded member of the IoT Security Foundation from inception. He has spent several years basically in electronics and microelectronics industries, right? This is where basically rubber meets the road. And we have the ultimate luxury and pleasure to have him on the call today to walk us through the journey. So John, I will not insert by providing a word-to-word translation of what your experience is. The experience that we have on the screen speaks volume of your depth and knowledge in the industry itself. So from here on, I would like to give it to you personally, and from all of the founding members, thank you for your time today to walk us through this. So I will stop presenting and give it to you so that you can share your insights with us.
Great. Well, look, on the contrary, Samir, thank you. And thanks to the rest of the founding members. You've got my details up there. As you'll know, I usually introduce myself as an expired embedded systems engineer. But there you can see it's written in a bit more glorious detail. I just get my screen up here.
Hold on, let me stop sharing.
Share my screen, there we go. Right, it will be that one. Right, hopefully you can all see that. So what I would like to start by saying, it's an absolute honor for me to be part of the welcome for the IoT Security Foundation Houston chapter. It's been quite a journey to get here. I'll tell you a bit more about that in a moment, but just in terms of chapters, this is something that we've been talking about and thinking about for probably the last 3 or 4 years. And I'm sure everybody here will be very aware that we had something that really delayed many of us called the pandemic. So if it wouldn't be for the pandemic, we may have started this a little sooner. It's also with great honor that I represent the work of the members of the IoT Security Foundation. So what I'm about to show you is a lot of hard work, a lot of collaboration, a lot of discussion, a lot of knowledge sharing. I usually start by saying that IoT security is a wicked challenge. And what I mean by a wicked challenge is I don't think it's something that we'll ever fully fix. And there's a very simple reason for that. You know, we have an expanding attack surface as more and more devices get added almost by the second. But what we also know is that the adversaries, those that we're up against, will find new ways to try to compromise our systems. So it's a constant game of cat and mouse. So that's why I call it a wicked challenge. Also, I would like to emphasize that it's significantly more than just a technological challenge. As a technologist, as an expired engineer myself, I think the technical issues are we can overcome, but there are many more dimensions to it, and I would include, you know, the typical people process as well as the technology, but it goes beyond that. It goes into policy and also something which is very much in vogue at the moment, geopolitics. So that all makes it quite a difficult challenge for us all. And that's why we need this collaboration. That's why we need what I call the super blue team. So I'm going to talk a bit more, just kind of to resonate off some of the things that Samir talked about. You'll hear a lot about journey here. And of course, in the journey, as we go along that journey, we increase our maturity. And that's a big part of what we're trying to achieve with IoTSF. I'm just going to, if I can here, turn my camera off, because I'm going to start looking at a screen over here. Please bear with me a moment. Chris, I don't know if you can turn my screen off unless you want to look at my side of my face here.
1 second.
I will come back, I promise. It is me. Good, thank you very much. So here we go. This is broadly what I want to walk through. A whole bunch of questions, you know, why are we here? Why do we exist? Who are we? What is it that we're really trying to do? How are we going to do it? What have we done so far? And then we get into the real exciting part about what the future is and how people here can perhaps participate in that journey. So I want to take everybody back. I want to transport you back. Samir talked about finding out about IoTSF in 2018, but where our story started, in particular where my story started, was in February 2015, when I was working for the National Microelectronics Institute in the UK, which is a semiconductor industry association. And at that time, the chairman came to me and said, John, do you think we need to take a look at IoT security? And I confess that kind of knocked me sideways a bit, because security was not my background. My background was in electronic engineering, semiconductors, innovation. And so I wondered, you know, what is it that I could do? Well, actually, the first question I had was, what's the problem? Isn't IoT a part of... oh, someone's drawing lines all over my screen there. I don't know who that is, but isn't IoT part of the broader cybersecurity landscape, and isn't cybersecurity a mature subject? Well, actually, when I went and had a look, it became apparent very quickly that it was a huge problem, because as soon as I started scratching away at the surface, I suddenly found lots of issues. What we did in May, that was just 3 months later, we held a summit called the IoT Security Summit, and we got a whole bunch of senior people, right from policymakers all the way down to the chip and IP. And you know, one of our great members is a company called ARM, who some of you may know make intellectual property for microprocessors. They are effectively the Intel of the mobile space. And the chief technology officer at the time, the CTO, a guy called Mike Muller, did a talk, and he talked about the ugly truth. His ugly truth was this: you will get hacked, which to the people in the room, engineers trying to defend, was quite a shock. But that is the ugly truth. You will get hacked. Despite your best efforts, you will be vulnerable at some point. And so the nature of the game changes. And for me, that was a seminal moment, because you not only think about how you design up front, but you also think about, okay, in the field, how do we remediate? But this slide here that I'm showing you, I've stolen this from one of the presenters of the day. It's had a few of the headlines updated, but I stopped updating it because I realized it was folly. There were just stories coming through nearly every week. And you can see some of those headlines: baby monitors, traffic lights, cars, insulin pumps, you know, pretty much everything, and routers and webcams, you know, two of our favorite categories, were constantly getting hacked. And so what we determined at the end of that one-day summit is we just can't carry on like this. Something has to be done. But what could be done? And so that's when we took the next step, and we went out and did a consultation with a whole bunch of stakeholders, which includes some of the categories that Samir was talking about earlier. Academics. We were talking to engineers. We were talking to entrepreneurs. We were talking to policymakers, standards people. And one thing we decided that we weren't going to do, which is quite ironic because we've had quite a lot of activity in the space, is we decided that we wouldn't become a standards body because we felt there were enough standards bodies, and we ought to figure out how we work with those standards bodies. And I'll share a bit more with you in a moment about that. But the good news is that on September the 23rd, 2015, in a building overlooking what's called St. Pancras Station, which, if anybody watches Harry Potter, they fly the car over St. Pancras Station. That was our backdrop, and we launched the Internet of Things Security Foundation. And we really wanted to get beyond the horror stories and really start to address some of the real issues in a very practical way. So this slide, I'm also kind of directing some of these comments towards the founding members, because you're going to find some of these issues crop up, and I've got a smile on my face because I've titled this slide, "What is IoT?" Deliberately, and I'm not necessarily going to give you a perfect answer, but what we found in our early discussions as we got people together, we would be talking about some very real challenges, and then you'd get about 10 or 15 minutes into the discussion and someone would say, "Yeah, but what is IoT?" And it was just a recurring theme. And for those of us who've been around technology for a long time, IoT is not a particularly attractive title, the Internet of Things. The first time I came across it was, some years ago. I thought, what is that? That just sounds like technology of stuff. But what I want to say to you is, labels, does that really matter? What it represents really matters. And for me, what the IoT represents is the next wave of the internet. We know its importance. I've put some words up here, which are actually lifted from our website, because at the time we were looking at a whole bunch of analyst reports. And what was interesting about that is that it was almost like there was a competition between the analysts. So the analysts would try to outdo each other on the economic impact of IoT. They were also trying to give us bigger numbers in terms of devices and what the impact would be. So we just stepped back from that and said, look, whatever it is, we know it's going to be trillions of dollars in terms of economic impact. We know it's going to be billions of devices that get connected. And what we don't know for sure right now, but we can see it, is there's going to be an awful lot of innovation. Some of this will be in terms of increasing productivity of our existing systems. Industry 4.0 was mentioned there, but there are going to be new products and services that come about by this new technology. And as I mentioned earlier, that's all fantastic, but what we do have to recognize that there's this thing called an attack surface, and with every device that gets added, that represents a growing attack surface, which we need to make sure we defend. So our mission is really quite simple. We haven't changed this. We started out with this, and we said, well, look, simply speaking, and we just need to make it safe to connect by helping to secure the Internet of Things. So here's some founding values, which I hope will guide you through some of the work that you do. We found these to be fairly immutable. The first two for me, well, the first one definitely is really targeted at the technology providers, and that's security first. It doesn't just stay there, of course. Whatever system you put together, you need to have a security mindset. But security first, designed in at the start, and terms that you may have seen along the way, security by design or security by default, those sorts of things. The next one, I think, certainly for the uninitiated, is really important. It's fit for purpose. What you will find is that when you put security into a system, that economics always play a major role in what you can do. And so in an ideal world, we would put the strongest security controls in that we possibly can. But in a practical world, we can't do that. So we need to make sure we understand what the threat landscape, what the threat model is, and then we can design better systems. And for me, who was, as I say, being an expired embedded systems engineer, when I was actually practicing, which I'm going back to the 90s now, we did not have so many connected systems. We had, what we would think of as air gap systems now. So for me, in my journey since 2015, the big story has really been one of resilience. What happens when it operates in the wild? How do you keep it fresh? How do you keep it up to date? And some of those things we continually explore in some of the more advanced work that we do. So very quickly, this is quite an old slide now, but I'll just run through it very quickly. On the left is how we are structured today. That is, we have an executive steering board. It is a steering board. It provides some form of governance, but we also have what we call this plenary group where all our members participate. And then we break out into working groups. So working groups, as we've had before, things like the assurance framework. We've got a smart built environment group, consumer products, etc. But the new kid on the block is international chapters. And it's clear to us that if our chapters take off the way we would really like them to, then this whole structure changes. It becomes more, chapters become the organization, not part of the organization. And of course, what we're trying to achieve through this generally is that, number one, first step is we really do need to promote awareness and what I've mentioned a few times now, a security mindset. And I put a security mindset against another mindset, which is one of just compliance. Compliance is doing the minimum. You have to do it. But what we really want to do is get people to be thinking bigger and thinking beyond what they absolutely have to do. A core staple of what we do is producing best practice materials and also some tools for vendors and users of IoT technologies. We've had quite an important and significant role with bilateral links into the international standards efforts, and I'll give you some evidence of that in a moment. We also have got quite an exercise in consulting and feeding into regulations on IoT cybersecurity. Now, in the preamble, before we started the call, I was speaking to Samir and saying to him about how regulation is, it's so easy to get it wrong, and it's so very difficult to get it right. Here in the UK, we just announced on April the 29th that a Product Security and Telecoms Infrastructure Act has been enacted, and that's got three very basic requirements. The reason why it's got three very basic requirements is because that's what everybody could agree on as being the absolute minimum that we need. But we all acknowledge and accept that it can't stay there, but we've got to start somewhere. So let's get going. Obviously, any self-respecting, not-for-profit, collaborative body like us, we do conferencing, we do meetings and networking events, and the chapters are, I hope, will be a very exciting extension of that. I certainly have lots of dreams of where that could go as we build up our chapter activity. And something which is also very interesting, again, I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment, about collaborative projects, what we can do within an organization, an umbrella like the IoT Security Foundation, how the extended value we can get by bringing parties together and winning public funding to do some projects. So I'm going to give you a quick run through now about some of the good stuff that we've been doing over the years. But I really want to start again by setting the aspiration for the chapter founders here whenever materials are produced, if indeed that's what you do, and I hope you do produce some good materials. But over the years, we've come up with these aspirational elements of our publications, and we call it AAA Weighted Guidance. So the very first one, accessible. Obviously, security and the actors that fall within the security delivery is quite a broad church. So accessible means we've got to somehow translate security language into the language of the audience that we're communicating to. One of the groups that we've just, our very latest publication in the smart building space is for facilities managers. Now, we're not going to go and start talking about, aspects of cryptography and standards of cryptography. They don't need to know that. But what we do is we deliver them the things that they need to do to manage the risk of IoT cybersecurity in buildings in a way which is authoritative. Of course, that's what we are. We are an expert body. But also, I think this is really key. It's got to be actionable. And we spend an awful lot of time taking words out of documents that get put together. We really do try to strip it down so they're very practical and actionable. And that's our definition of a AAA rated documents. So in the early days, I'm going back now, you can see some of the dates on here, 2018. We started off by saying, well, look, let's not let perfect be the enemy of the good. And again, that is a phrase which will serve you well, because perfection can take too long and the world won't wait for you. So what does good look like? We started out by producing some architecture documents just by giving examples of what we felt were good examples and the reasoning that went behind them. Back in 2018, of course, everybody was looking at this thing called regulation, and we knew it was going to come. So how do we help prepare an industry for this onset of regulation? So that report obviously is quite old now. It's out of date. Things have moved along quite significantly. But as I say on the top of the slide here, early doors, that's what we were interested to do, produce some fairly quick but good examples of, what security looks like. This document is one of the most popular downloads we have. This is really aimed at technology producers. The guys who put this together set themselves quite a challenge. What they wanted to do was explore various components of security for developers, but they didn't want to go into a lot of detail. So as one of the key authors explained it to me, he said, John, what I want to do is I've got this idea that you've got an entrepreneur, working away in his garage, and he needs to put security in. So what we want to do is produce a guide, which effectively you can just put one page up on the wall, and they've got it papered around the wall, and it gives them the basics of what's involved in each of those headings that you can see there, from classification of data, through encryption, credential management, etc. But without doing chapter and verse, quick introduction, and then some jump off points. Here's how you find out more. But that way we could get people up to speed very, very quickly. Again, that's one of the most popular downloads that we have. This one, the IoT Security Assurance Framework, is what we would consider one of the crown jewels. It started out as a consumer product developer guide, but what happened was along the way, as you can imagine, and it seems somewhat obvious from this side of the document, but a lot of the security requirements are not just specific to any one sector, like we were looking at consumer at the time. So it moved from being a consumer design guide into a proper framework. Now, the framework is hopefully it's self-explanatory, but fundamentally what we have here is a whole group of sections to consider for developers. And we try to put in what we think is a superset of all of the requirements. So within each of those categories there, ranging from the business processes through the hardware stacks and the software stacks, through the application, even into the configuration and the supply chain, right through to end of life and how you dispose of things. There are a whole set of what we tend to think of as micro requirements. But you know what? You may not need to, some of those micro requirements may not be applicable to what you're trying to do. And that's absolutely okay. What we ask for is that at least you've given it some consideration and you either rule it in or rule it out. That's a public document, which you can download from the IoTSF website. I do apologize for the messiness of this slide. There's a few things I wanted to get on and show you here, but this is the accompaniment to that assurance framework. This is a member-only resource. You can see over on the right-hand side here, here's the cover, but in effect, it's delivered via a spreadsheet. There's a configuration panel up front where what we've tried to do in very simple form, ask the user, what are your confidentiality, integrity, and availability requirements? You know, are they all what we call class 0 basic? So you dial them in over here, or is there some sort of variation of these? And what happens is in the spreadsheet that follows, and there are, if I go back here, there are tabs for each of these assurance applicability levels. Once you dial these in, you will find that the recommendations change. So at a base level, most of the requirements are advisory, but as you dial up the security strength, those start to turn into mandatory requirements. Now we term this, we kind of pitch this as what we call a pre-compliance, a pre-standards tool. And what we mean by that is this, is that we see standards evolving over time, but they look to us like they are going to be variations on a theme. And a lot of those come back to the principles which are in this framework. And so the piece that I've laid out here down in the bottom right-hand corner shows you this standard, the ETSI 303645, which is, you know, one of the leading global standards in baseline consumer IoT. We take each of the requirements and we map them to, within the 303645, there are 13 requirements, but what we do, we map them to the micro requirements. Now, because we've got the framework, what this means that any standard that comes along, we can just map the requirements to those standards. And so we have another tab in the framework, which maps to the NIST 8259, for example. And again, we will update that to something which we know is coming, which is the CRA coming down from Europe, and any other standard we think which is applicable. So the idea is if designers use the framework, they should be able to just map it to any standard which comes down and demonstrate their compliance to it. Again, just to re-emphasize, it's a pre-compliance, pre-standards tool. A lot of good feedback on this. In fact, I've had people more than I can remember tell me how they tell me it's the best they've seen. We haven't seen anything that's better than this. I hope to maintain that bragging right. If anybody else thinks there's something better, then I'd certainly like to see it. But we aim to stay ahead of the game. This document is maintained. It's reviewed at least quarterly. And one of the ways we do that is we put together some project teams to dive a little deeper into various aspects. And I've given two examples here. On the left-hand side, I'm sure anybody that's been involved in cybersecurity these past 5 years or so will know the importance of supply chain attacks. So what we did, because we're IoT Security Foundation, we took a specific view about the IoT security supply chain and what security requirements we felt were needed there. Now, when that report was produced, requirements did drop out the bottom of it, and they went back into the framework, this document here. Software bill of materials, SBOMs. We think SBOMs are incredibly important for security. I don't think that's contentious. What's really interesting to me, who's somebody who's not sort of dyed in the wool security, is I can see that the utility of SBOMs and CVEs can really help with automating some of the the maintenance of security as we go forward. So again, we did a deep dive on that. We produced a paper, and some of the requirements that came out of that found their way back into the framework. I'm going to pick the pace up a little bit here. Consumer, new standards and regulation. Again, we know regulation is happening around the world. So what we try to do for all of our members is to keep them ahead of the game. Nobody likes to be surprised. Certainly, we don't want unwelcome regulation, which puts costs and burdens on business. That's why we engage in the process as early as we can. But what we also try to do is provide materials which really help our members meet those forthcoming regulations. And on our website, we've done quite a lot on consumer, because this is where it really starts. So there's various webinars and fact sheets there. Vulnerability disclosure. We see vulnerability disclosure as this was new to me, by the way. I found I'd learned about vulnerability disclosure in that very first summit that I mentioned earlier back in 2015. It wasn't something that I'd come across before, but the concept is really straightforward, of course, and that being that once a vulnerability is discovered, there's a mechanism that it can be reported and fixed. So one of the early documents that we produced was a vulnerability disclosure best practice guide. You can see on the screen here, we revised it in September 2021. One of the reasons why we produced this document is because there is a standard which is associated with vulnerability disclosure, but it's behind a paywall. And we felt that because it's a basic hygiene requirement, that should be free. It's not complicated. So we produced this guide. What we also did is do some market research. And we said, well, if we think that vulnerability disclosure is a canary, i.e. if somebody hasn't got a vulnerability disclosure, does that tell you something about their posture, their security posture of their products? We think it does. It's not perfect, but certainly anybody who's purchasing IoT products, the fact that there's a reporting channel should give an extra level of confidence that the team that produce those products is making sure that the security keeps pace with the market. And as you can see here, we started this in 2018. We identified a cohort of about 330 or so companies. And to our surprise? I think we were surprised at how low the numbers were. We felt it would be higher than this, but we found that less than 10% of the companies, those 330 companies that were selling, in retail stores and in places like Amazon and, Target, etc., less than 10% of them had a vulnerability disclosure process policy. We've seen that increase steadily over the years, not as fast as we'd like, and no doubt in some way due to our activity to promote it. But we expect the next time that we do the report, this should jump quite significantly, because as I mentioned, the regulation which is coming from the UK requires a reporting mechanism. So we would expect from 27%, we would expect that to certainly go up. Well, we'd like to see it 100%, of course, but we'll see if we ever get there. Now, a lot of what I've been talking about there is really been aimed at the producers of technology, and necessarily so, because obviously if the producers of the technology are not putting security or designing security in, then it cannot be used out in the field. But where I think, an interesting development and something that we want to do an awful lot more of, and where we think chapters will play an extra special role, is looking into the verticals. I've called this slide IoT User Awareness, but it really is in operation. So as you can see here, there's a cover. We decided that we were going to start exploring smart cities. And very quickly, we decided, it's very difficult to find commonality between different smart cities, what their objectives are, who the players are within those smart cities planning and who operates them. And so that's very difficult to produce some guidance material. So what we did is we backed down to the building level. And so we put a paper together. And again, this is something that I think maybe the chapter would like to do, is when there's an area of interest, a really good way to try to crystallize where the challenges are is to put together a white paper, just talk about the problem space and talk about where potential solutions are. And that's what we did back in 2019 with the buildings. We produced this paper. What we then did is we moved forward and got a group together to talk about what are the areas of cybersecurity within the whole built environment space. And we came up with 4 subgroups. Things were going swimmingly well before the pandemic hit, and then the pandemic hit, which slowed us down a bit. But one of those groups came out and led the way post-pandemic with a best practice guide for facilities professionals. Again, that's an area which we're developing at the moment, but we would certainly like to see other sectors represented. And I'll mention some of those areas where we think will need attention shortly. So, okay, so what? We've done all this stuff, so what? Is anybody reading it? Is anybody taking notice? Well, that's what the next few slides are really about. Bearing in mind, this is a fairly niche audience that we have, and across approximately 12, I think, publications. Last August, we exceeded over 50,000 downloads of those guidance documents, which of course is huge pride for us. We're very proud of that. And of course, for everybody who's taken the time to write the words, it kind of gives a justification that your efforts are being well received. And I can tell you that we are approaching another milestone. 50K was back in last August. I haven't updated it, but we're well underway. Who's taken notice? Well, I've mentioned some standards. 2 of the prominent ones for certainly products and devices are ETSI 303645 and the NIST 8259. And we're delighted that those groups, the conversations we were having, they are aware of our documentations and they use them in their informative references, which support the standard. This cover on the right-hand side it was an interesting report. It's a very good report. Anybody who wants to, who's kind of tantalized by the title, the IoT Security Landscape, it's still a really good read, even, it was written in 2019. It's a report that was produced by this organization called TNO, a very respectable organization, but it was commissioned by the Dutch and the Singaporean government. So it was a co-sponsored document. And I'm delighted to say that, even at that time, IoT Security Foundation was represented quite respectfully within that guide. Now, I've been talking largely about best practice, the here and now. My time in the semiconductor space, where I was always interested was on the leading edge, because that's where the dynamic was and that's where the activity of most interest was. When I came into cybersecurity, as I've hopefully illustrated there, there were a lot more remedial activities that needed to take place and still need to take place. But as we have evolved as an organization, we've become increasingly aware of what's the next practice, what is the next technology that's coming along, and indeed, could we influence that? This is very interesting from our perspective for a number of reasons. The first is it's a collaborative project which we were able to win some public funding for. And there's an SME called Inquiring Minds. Hopefully you've all have heard of British Telecom and Cisco. You may have heard of this little university here called the University of Oxford, and of course us. We got together and we started to collaborate on what we saw as an open standard for next generation router and network security. And I won't go into the detail. There's a website here which you can go to if this is the sort of thing that you're interested in. But fundamentally, what we were trying to do was produce some open standards which spoke to this ideal goal of continuous assurance and zero trust environments. So again, That's not best practice. That's how we're trying to influence next practice. Put this in. I'm not going to talk too much about this, other than to say that I've spent, well, actually more than 30 years now. It's getting on for 40 years in tech. And one day about 3 years ago, I had a call from the director of a program called the Digital Security by Design. And he said, John, you know, we're doing, we've got this technology which is coming out of the University of Cambridge, which is really quite important. We would like the IoT Security Foundation to represent industry on, you know, how that program develops. And I said to him, well, this is great, but, you know, quite busy. Tell me a bit about what it's about, and I'll see if we can find the time. And I can't remember the full conversation, but I do remember the hook that got me. He mentioned the term provenance of pointers. And for anybody who's written a piece of software, you'll understand what that means. But fundamentally, there is a problem with the entire computing base of traditional computing architectures. All of the processor architectures, they have a fundamental flaw, and that is memory safety. Memory safety is a thing. I put some numbers up here, which come from Google and from Microsoft. And although it's not specifically IoT, it is cybersecurity, and by extension influences that. What they found is, through a number of the bugs that are being reported to them, about 70% of them could be traced back to memory safety issues. So if we could fix that, that would go a long way to helping us be more secure. There's actually another part to the digital security by design beyond memory safety, and that's compartmentalization, but that gets very technical and complicated quickly. You know, my brain can't keep up, but fundamentally the next generation of computing, the aim of the project is to deliver a new architecture which delivers these capabilities via this technology called Cherry. Cherry stands for, if I can remember, Capability Hardware Enhanced Risk Instructions. So you've got it baked into the technology itself. It makes it virtually impossible to have memory safety issues. Again, we're part of that program. It's a big collaborative program. Lots of companies, lots of researchers, lots of very smart people involved in that. And as I say, I get lost very quickly in those discussions. So that's great. That's all fantastic. And I remember an executive steering board meeting about 3 or 4 years ago, and the summary we got to is like, you know, we're doing some really good stuff, but is it enough? Are we doing enough? And I don't think any of us felt that we were doing enough. There's always more to do. This diagram here, some of you may be familiar with it. This is what we refer to as the butterfly diagram. It was published by an organization called Beecham Research, who, well, we used to be much more close to Beecham Research pre-pandemic. They used to come along and do some good talks. But this chart kind of illustrates, once you start breaking down the various aspects, sectors, and then the aspects of IoT security, which need attention, covering, as you can see across the bottom, buildings, energy, consumer, health, industrial, transport, retail, etc., etc. And the list will go on. I mean, I would probably add, I don't know if they've got farming and agriculture and mining and all sorts of things that people have been talking to us since. But the point is, that's a big space. So we asked ourselves, how do we scale the activity up? How can we do more? How do we create what we called a super blue team on our website? And we decided that actually we needed to go much more global. We needed to get more people involved in all of this, which was the genesis of the chapters program. And as I said at the start, it's a real pleasure for me to be here today with the very first Houston chapter meeting. What we wanted to do was make it very easy to create chapters. We wanted to reduce all of the bureaucracy, the management overhead. We wanted to lower the costs. And we really wanted to appeal to like-minded individuals with the spirit of collaboration to do stuff like we've been doing, but tackle more areas than we can do sequentially, as we've been doing in the past. So it's great to be here today with these wonderful people. I'm going to start with Pankaj, because unfortunately Pankaj didn't quite make the announcement when we made the announcement, something to do with some delayed administration, but Pankaj, Roya, David, Samir, you've all met, and Durgesh. Great what you're doing. Very much wishing you all the best as you go forward. And just before I finish, for anybody here who wants to be part of this movement that we have, you'd be very welcome. It is increasingly international, and it's really about championing and driving the IoT cyber security agenda. So I hope that was okay, Samir. I think I might have I done for time?
We have few minutes, and there are a few questions. First of all, thank you very much. That was detailed overview, as what I was really hoping and asking for as well. Thanks very much for walking us through. I do have some of the questions, but one of the things that I did like was, of course, the overall journey, but the Sensu fan that shows the width of the and the breadth of the overall IoT landscape that we are looking at, and what work lies ahead of us, right? So with that, there is a question from Vivek, and John, I thought you would be the best person. That's why I kept it for you to answer. The question reads out: European regulators are pushing product security from standards and certification point of view. North America is still at the guidelines and recommendations. What do you reckon as the low-hanging fruit on improving the security posture either way? And Vivek, if you can come off mute to explain more, if there is something more you would like to add to that question, feel free, please.
So if I think I understand the question, I'll attempt to answer it. But as I mentioned, the regulation is really hard, not only in trying to define it, but then you've got what comes after. How do you police it? Who's policing the regulation? What we've seen is regulation appeared in California fairly early on, in Oregon, I think, and I think there's a few other places. We saw the advancement of the ETSI standard. It started out as a technical specification, and then it evolved into a standard, which now, last time I looked, there were about 16 or 18 regions around the world who are starting to follow the lead of the ETSI standard. And although the regulations they're looking to put in place didn't mandate the standard, it could be satisfied by following that standard. And indeed, if you look at the CRA, which is coming through Europe right now, some of the wording in that standard, I know because a lot of our members have spoken to us about it, it scares them because they just don't know how they're going to satisfy the requirements. And for me, what I say back to them is that don't be scared. This is a problem with the regulation, not with the person trying to satisfy it. Because, as I mentioned, having gone through that process to get the Product Security Telecoms Infrastructure Act delivered in the UK, I know that process can take time, and it is really crucial to be very specific about the language. So yes, Europe is marching ahead. I think there are other challenges too. Europe, obviously I'm in the UK, hopefully that's obvious to people here, but I'm in the UK, and we did this thing called Brexit a few years back, which I'm still not sure I'm over it, but it is what it is. But what it means is that there are now 27 countries who are really trying to adhere to this harmonized standard. And what that means is they will have to do local translation. So the problem just gets even more complicated because it's delegated to national authorities. So I think the work in Europe is it's underway, but I think it's still got a fair way to go, and I think there will be challenges with it. And again, the guys down at Enisa who are based out in Greece, I visited them several years back. I feel the IoTSF really needs to re-engage and maybe help them with that process. But what I can say is that if you were to use the framework that I talked about, you will be fine, because it will map to the CRA, whatever form it comes out in whichever country in Europe. You will be able to satisfy those requirements. And again, I just re-emphasize, that's why we consider a pre-compliance tool. It's not another one, it actually is in advance. And as Noos, with the work that we do with those projects, what we have is people looking ahead. So we're anticipating things, and then that's why it comes down into the framework, which means people should be thinking about them. So by the time regulation gets through, all of those processes, all that bureaucracy, they should be in a fairly confident place that they'll be able to meet, those requirements. I hope that goes some way to answering the question.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, I was just wondering what could be the first step, right? What's the low-hanging fruit that we can do to improve the security posture? Because otherwise we'll be talking about it for the next 5 years and still progress is going to be limited, right? That's what we're trying to avoid. Obviously, that's the focus of this group. So maybe I'm just asking the simple question, so what are we going to do, right?
Yeah, my apologies. Yeah, I think the low-hanging fruit is really what we've been doing in that regulation. If you look at PSTI, it's got 3 basic recommendations. One is no universal default passwords. We've also had discussion about passwords. Are passwords relevant for IoT? Some of us would like to see passwords go. We think they were fine in the days of Caesar, but with billions of devices, passwords don't really make a lot of sense for doing, your authentication and authorization. So no universal default passwords. That will take out a lot of the bot attacks that we're seeing. The second one is to do with vulnerability disclosure and reporting, as mentioned. So that helps keep products, fit for purpose while they're in operation. That's the second one. And the third one is really to do with, it started out as software updates, but it's in terms of the regulation, what it's found its way into is to say that anybody who's selling IoT products on the consumer market, they have to, at the time of purchase, disclose the support period. They don't say that there's a minimum, it could be there's no support, that's fine as long as it's displayed. Obviously, I think the people we talk to and ask us what would we recommend, you're looking at, do you do 0 and then find that no one's going to buy it because they haven't got any support? But obviously you don't want to put out maybe 15 years because that's got an overhead, a support overhead. So that for me those are the low-hanging fruits. That went through an awful lot of discussion, but they are the bare minimum. Again, through that process, we would have liked to have seen a couple more requirements around privacy.
So John, I think we are up on time. Let's, what I would recommend others is, if there are any questions, and sorry, John, to cut you off there, but I think to be respectful, we need 1 or 2 more slides just to conclude, right? So my ask is, these are good questions. I have few of my own basically that I have noted down to ask. So I encourage that discussion to be taken up on the LinkedIn group. This way we can interact and be more collaborative in terms of getting these answers as well as the questions answered. So I do encourage all of you to go there. I'm going to post it myself. John is part of that IoTSF Houston LinkedIn group as well. So feel free to push those questions out over there and have some discussion out there. So with that, last couple more minutes, sorry for running over. first timers nervousness, let's call it that way. But Durgesh, back to you for what's next.
All right, Samir, thank you. And my name is Durgesh. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's next, for our ITSF Houston chapter. Um, you know, we talked about what, why, and how, but we're going to look at where, right? So where all this is going to happen for our Houston community. So we're looking at doing or organizing some webinars, which are monthly. So starting in July, we're going to start doing webinars such as this with some very focused topics, about vulnerability disclosures, IoTSF implementation, best practices, maybe risk assessments, and so on. And so, if you look at the August webinar and the September webinar, we are looking for active topics and speakers. So, if you are somebody in the IoTSF space and have insights to share, please do reach us. We're also looking at doing the in-person events because in-person events are, I guess, are the way to go for our chapter, because I think we're probably going to have more collaboration. And since COVID, we all been wanting to meet in person, and this is a Houston chapter that we're talking about. So look out for the space on LinkedIn if you're not part of the LinkedIn group. I believe Chris just shared the link to join the LinkedIn group. That's the best way to join our chapter as of now. And we will post all of that information on that LinkedIn group. So Samir, is there another slide after this that talks about maybe yes. So again, this is all of the links that we were talking about. Our main website has a ton of information about IoTSF, which is Security Foundation, but also our IoTSF Houston chapter. And also, I'll put something on the chat for everybody. We have a FAQ that we prepared because we were anticipating some questions. So if you have some questions, hopefully the FAQs will help you with that. Again, we're looking for partnerships with universities locally here in Houston, as well as the IoT folks in this space, manufacturers, service providers, business owners, asset owners. So again, if you are amongst any of these categories, please do reach us on our LinkedIn group so we can start some work together. We can collaborate. And I hope to see you all in the future webinars and in-person events. So over to you, Samir.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So yeah, we are looking for the chapter topics, anything that is from the IoT security space. Please feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. You know all of us. You have seen our faces through the pictures. So in person, individually, if you want to get connected with us, brainstorming some of the topics, feel free to get in touch. Post it on the LinkedIn group individually. Email us. Doesn't matter. All of us are interconnected to enough social media. So first of all, again, thank you very much for IoTSF, John, Chris, for both of you to be that support that we needed here for this webinar. It's certainly first of it. We hope to have more of these and more technical discussions coming up. So thank you everybody who took time to participate in this. I hope this was very valuable and informative for you. Certainly, even though I had the presentation up front, listening to John was really something where I picked few nuggets myself. So I'm sure it was likely beneficial for all of you. Look forward on 13th of July again to talk about IoTSF's IoT security webinar topic. Thank you very much, everybody.